Hi, my name is Neshwalina Khan, and I'm so excited to introduce you to Reimagining Disabled Futures, a podcast from Dawn Canada. This series is about centering the voices of disabled women and gender diverse people as we imagine what our futures can and should look like. Futures rooted in justice, care, and possibility. Reimagining Disabled Futures is part of Dawn Canada's 10-year vision for change. Root resilience, root change, and root justice. Through these conversations, we're exploring what resilience means in our communities, how real change happens, and how justice can guide us toward more inclusive, intersectional, feminist, and liberatory futures. We invite you to listen, share, and join us as we build futures where disabled people not only survive, but thrive. Hello and welcome to the debut episode of Reimagining Disabled Futures. I'm Neshwalina Khan, and on this episode, myself and Erin will be diving into a conversation about Sustainable Livelihoods Canada and the role they play in empowering communities across Canada. Sustainable Livelihoods is an evidence-based approach designed to capture the many effects of social and economic exclusion in people's lives. We are grateful to have spoken to the Sustainable Livelihoods Canada team, a national nonprofit with an approach to economic inclusion that goes beyond the traditional models of employment and focuses on building long-term resilience and well-being. In this conversation, we'll explore how sustainable livelihoods as a model creates opportunities to use an assets-based approach versus a deficit-based approach. Whether it's through skill building, financial literacy, or fostering networks of support, these strategies reflect the power of community-led solutions, and we're excited to unpack them with our guests today. So please grab yourself a cup of tea and settle in, and let's reimagine what sustainable, inclusive futures can look like.
Hey, I'm Erin.
Hey, I'm Nashwa.
And today we're joined by Sustainable Livelihoods Canada with Vibhuti Mehra and Mary Ferguson. Can you introduce yourselves?
Hi, and I'm Mary Ferguson. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the chair person for Sustainable Livelihoods Canada.
Sure. My name is Vibhuti Mehra, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm the Director of Operations and Programs at Sustainable Livelihoods Canada.
Thank you. And can you tell a little bit about the work that Sustainable Livelihoods Canada does and what we should know about you?
Sustainable Livelihoods Canada was founded in 2019, but the work was based on work that I'd been doing with someone else for about 25 years. We decided to incorporate because there were a lot of organizations that were using the framework. So now we're a national nonprofit social enterprise, and we're dedicated to promoting awareness and use of the Sustainable Livelihoods approach. We really found it very useful applying the framework to our work about 20 years ago. And the reason was that it really provides a holistic strength-based framework for being able to work with people. It helps individuals and communities to build resilience, and it supports individuals and communities to build their own capacity to achieve social and economic security. So one of the reasons we liked it, it's a fairly old framework. It's being used internationally and has been for probably 35 years. And the concept includes the definition of a livelihood, which is more than a job. Typically, when you hear livelihood, it's about a job. But this framework included social inclusion and citizenship. So being able to participate in the economy and in society and basically belonging. The idea of empowerment and independence, the ability to make decisions and to control finances. The economic and social security, looking at adequate income and equitable opportunities. A livelihood is sustainable when it can reduce vulnerability and build resilience to cope with and recover from stresses and shocks. It's able to maintain and enhance capabilities and assets of individuals and communities over time. One of the reasons we really stuck to the Sustainable Livelihoods framework because it was a different way of framing poverty reduction. The language of poverty reduction typically comes from a deficit perspective, whereas the Sustainable Livelihoods framework really was looking at assets. And that just seemed to be a lot more powerful than the idea of looking at deficits.
So we'll explore a few ideas that kind of lay at the core of the Sustainable Livelihoods framework. And one of the pieces that it's important to remember that people who are struggling are often living within a vulnerability context. And these are obstacles that people face that prevent them from achieving their optimal human potential. So what we look at when we look at this from the SL framework is understanding how are people positioned within society, and what are some of the forces that are holding them back from achieving that human potential. So you would see in this diagram that we have the human being, the individual at the core, and the immediate circles that surround them are the people who have the most immediate impact on their lives, which is their family, the community, and the workplace within which they live and work and earn a livelihood. And then the societal pressures or societal structures that impact both the community and the workplace as well as family, and how all of that filters down to the individual in what their experiences may be as they were growing up. But in addition to that, one of the biggest pieces of framework approach that we use is addressing the shocks that people experience from outside of these other circles that immediately surround them. And these are systemic forces and trends and cycles within our society that deeply impact people's ability to achieve what they can if they do not have the right kind of resources available to them. So we look at three key approaches, which is looking at a systems level understanding of what are the formal and informal ways in which the society is structured, and the intersecting biases that come within society that can affect people's opportunities basically because of discrimination or exclusion. So think about examples such as racism, sexism, colonialism, ableism, many other of those isms that actually keep people out of accessing opportunities. But we also think about trends that happen on a broader level that are outside of the individual's control. Sometimes there are broader social, economic, political forces that impact a person's security. So when we see globally right now, there's displacement and migration, both because of environmental issues, climate change issues, as well as war and strife, and that people are moving en masse from where they originally belonged and trying to build a new life elsewhere. We look within our Canadian context, we are seeing the impact of inflation and how everything is so expensive and out of reach for families now, even basic needs. We think about wage inequities when we talk about workers of certain kind or gender-based wage inequities that we see. And the fact that we've been moving towards precarious jobs, there's a lot of gig economy work that people are engaged in to survive. So these are survival jobs. They're not necessarily doing jobs that help them thrive. And the trends that do not support them having access to those kinds of jobs very easily. And the very last thing that we look at is cycles. So in terms of our stages as how we evolve as human beings, we see different patterns that may impact people. So if you are growing up in a very patriarchal family and you have very gendered family roles, as a woman, you would have very limited choices or even been given options to choose for yourselves. The fact that women may not have reproductive choices that may impact their ability to whether they want a certain size family or don't want a family or don't want children. And our relationships, if women are or people who are experiencing gender-based violence, those are some of the cycles that can deeply impact your ability to engage fully in society. So this is a context that actually allows people to think about that the burden of responsibility to achieve that full human potential is not solely mine, but that I have to have all these supports and systems in place in order for me to fully thrive in society as a human being.
So I've been very fortunate to be able to work on very many projects over the last 30 years. And because we were working on various projects, we were able to start identifying what livelihood stages might look like. So if you look at the extreme left, someone who's in that stage is still depleting assets, is in a cycle of crisis, focusing on coping and meeting basic needs. And then, because we were doing a lot of evaluation work with organizations, we were able to identify that when people became involved in these organizations, they started engaging and they started to connect to community. And then typically people moved on and got a foundation of support. They began to get more stable. They were starting to build employability, but people still required support. So if you look at the top of the diagram, there's that arrow that goes back. And the majority of funding was going to those earlier 3 stages, but most of the funding wasn't working with people long enough to be able to move to transitions. So there were a few organizations, a few funding organizations and funding collaboratives that started looking at the idea of supporting transition. where we documented that when people exited from programs, they typically began to lose assets. And that's why there was a lot of churning going on in those first 3 stages. When organizations have longer term funding to work with people, they are able to transition and consolidate and develop their livelihood, their sustainable livelihood. If you look at the bottom, the earlier state, when someone's in an earlier stage, they're really still putting together the conditions for participation. So if they don't have transportation, they don't have childcare, they don't have basic needs, they don't know what they're going to eat the next day, those are conditions that need to be in place for someone to feel like they can participate in society and in the economy. And then as people get further along, they begin to think a little bit more about the future. But if someone is at an earlier stage, they're in survival mode. They really are coping from one day to the next. And then as they move along, they begin to build capacity to participate and are able to then look at making progress towards a sustainable livelihood. The interesting thing about the framework that we really liked was that it provided an answer to the question of how do you define living well? And we know that people have all aspects of their lives. And so we were able to identify a variety of different asset areas that make up a person's whole life. And those included connections and support, support from family and from friends, access to services, networks to help the person find work, leadership, and then the idea of sense of self, having self-confidence, understanding strengths and abilities, sense of hope, the ability to keep going when things get tough. And another area is skills and employability, having lived experience with abilities and skills and knowledge, education and training, the ability to solve problems, work-life balance, the ability to keep on learning. And money was another asset area, is the ability to make ends meet, having savings, the ability to understand and manage money and control over money. And then the area of health, stress levels, mental health, physical health. And then basic needs, access to housing, safety, support, child and elder care. So these 6 asset areas really give a picture of a person's whole life. And what we were able to find with a variety of projects that we were working with is that as people became engaged in programs, we began to see a change in, first of all, in connections and sense of self. And then thirdly, basic needs started to improve. So these, what we really liked about the framework is it was able to describe and provide a language for understanding about what was going on in people's lives. What strengths did they have in each of these areas, and what area did they feel that they wanted to enhance?
So I think the idea continues to explore this notion of building resilience and how do we build livelihood strategies that help people build their resilience to cope with difficult life and circumstances. And one of our role as Sustainable Livelihoods Canada has really been helping organizations to look at different ways in which they can help their participants respond to their vulnerabilities, both the ones that they may have experienced from their immediate circle, but as well as the systemic vulnerabilities that keep them out. So we are really in the role of helping organizations build their capacity to do that work, where they have received training from us often to offer intentional coaching supports to individuals. So the way they talk to their clients is very different from how you would have a traditional service delivery model. You use an approach of asking and eliciting responses that help the service users see their own strengths so that they can work towards reducing their vulnerability, build their resilience, and build economic security and social security for themselves. But as Mary pointed out earlier, people are at different stages in their life, and the emphasis has to be relevant to where people are at. So we do emphasize on meeting people where they're at. So if people are in an early stage of the livelihood, the continuum that Mary shared earlier, we know that the conditions for participation have to be priority, which means if someone is precariously housed, housing is definitely a priority. Connecting them to income security supports is a priority. Connecting them to food supports is a priority. Safety planning is a priority. Often these are situations that need to be taken care of immediately. Then you can talk about working with the service user on how they can build their own capacity and skills to engage with more meaningful and deeper level process within organizations or with themselves to set goals for their future. So when we come to that stage where people have received the basic needs and they are in a place where they have the conditions for participation being met to a degree, then we start working on the capacity to participate. So here our emphasis on how do organizations help their program participants build a set of skills and behaviors that help them with making choice, give the power to them, and it's the power with the people, not power over the people, and help them understand the journey that they have choice to make and they can sustain if they were receiving the right kinds of supports. So then they identify what kinds of assets they would like to build, and maybe something that is a social connection aspect of their life is extremely well organized. They do seem to have lots of people who support them, but they may not be in a very good place in terms of mental health, and that's affecting their ability to fully engage with that social connections. So that's where we start thinking, okay, maybe the mental health supports need to be put in place in order for the other asset also to be fully utilized. And then we think about longer term asset building when people have come to the place of being in a future orientation, that I want to get a certain kind of job or build towards a certain kind of career, or I would like to go back to school. Those are long-term aspirations. The work starts much earlier, but it is starting with the place of building the capacity to participate. And when we talk about building the capacity to participate, there is a very particular approach that we encourage at Sustainable Livelihoods Canada, and we actually train our community partners to build that skill within their own organization. We ask people to use a motivational interviewing approach. The idea being that through motivational interviewing, you are not focusing as much on what is missing and what is the gap, but actually exploring the strengths and resilience that people already have within them that they may not have noticed or paid attention to. So these are open-ended questions that ask people and validate them in their lived experience and talk about how they have managed to survive despite all the odds that they have faced, and then identify potential strengths within that person to help them move towards that position of being able to thrive. So people actually tap into their own strengths through this approach instead of an expert telling them what they can be doing for their future or how they should potentially make choices for their life. Oftentimes, the people we are working with have been disenfranchised or marginalized and not making choices because they're always seeing somebody else making choices for them. So it is important that they have that place where they can reclaim that power and start making choices about their own life. The motivational interviewing approach also helps people foster self-determination. So because you are deciding for yourself what in that moment feels right for you, without any judgment, without being told that this may not be the best option, you are given the independence to plan for your own journey, and you have a facilitator in the service provider who's walking with you, and that you learn skills on how to self-advocate within sometimes systems that you may have felt excluded from, marginalized from, or actually discriminated against. And so you learn to self-advocate, really helps people move from that survival mode and move towards believing that change in my life circumstances are possible, and I do have a hope for a future. So you would see on the right-hand side, the diagram on the slide talks about the various things that go into building a capacity pathway. So we do planning in terms of action planning with the service users, and they set their own plans. It's called a My Plan. So they decide the plan based on where they're at and what they would like help with, what they think they are able to do by themselves. The self-assessment for their needs, or let's just say what they're going to build in terms of assets, is done by themselves, not the service provider telling them, you need to focus on your mental health right now. Well, the person is saying, no, I actually would like to focus on my immigration, or you need to focus on your income security right now, but the service user is telling you, no, I actually want to reconnect with my family. So really listening to the service user and where they want to focus on building their assets in the moment. And that really problem-solving skill that is built in being able to assess and find your own strength, and really learn how to navigate the system, because the idea is that irrespective of whether or not you have connection with a service provider, you should be able to be in a position to claim what is rightfully your entitlement. We also focus on financial literacy goals, basic money management skills. These are things that organizations can do in helping people build their financial assets, money-related assets, that people can make decisions for themselves, and really speak for themselves, have a voice in the process of their journey to reclaim their life and potential.
So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about the stages that I spoke about a couple of minutes ago. If you look at the earlier stage where people are destabilized and where they're depleting assets, some of the indicators that a person might be at that stage are that they have a low self-esteem, they have lack of personal safety and security, compromised health, possibly insufficient or insecure income. And then when someone is ready to connect to community or the economy, they start thinking about making changes in their lives. But the reality is that they might still be living in substandard housing or not have housing at all. They may not have the conditions for participation, childcare, transportation. They might be looking for decreasing isolation. They might want to access banking. They might want to access healthcare services. And then with foundation building was basically where there's a base of stability that's starting to be put in place, building some employability skills, and then but still requiring some support. So when someone's in the foundation building stage, they have a better sense of self-worth and self-confidence. Housing is adequate or is changing in the right direction. Ability to participate, to meet participation requirements with the children in childcare. Starting to patch together entitlements and income. There are a lot of people who aren't even accessing entitlements and income that they're eligible for, and improving health. When someone moves to a transition stage, we begin to see increased resilience, an ability to recover from setbacks. They're clearly focused on building skills. The healthcare becomes self-directed, and they begin to focus on the best income sources. And then in consolidation, we see growing independence, the ability to play a leadership role, improved purchasing power, strong financial management knowledge, access to health. And then when you look at sustainable livelihood, so what we've been able to document, and these examples come from the various organizations that we've been working with, when someone gets to the sustainable livelihood stage, one of the things that they typically do is they want to give back to the community. They begin to volunteer, and they have a strong support network. They have the housing that they want. They've got their own skill and education levels to where they want, and they have a solid foundation of social protection in place, including insurance savings and retirement savings. So when you put all the pieces together, you've got the assets. When an organization is working with someone, everybody comes with a certain set of assets. And then the service providers provide practical interventions with people that begin to make change. But the thing that's become most important from our perspective is the idea of the livelihood strategies, where people build assets and reduce their own vulnerability. If you provide a situation where you can talk to people and they begin to talk about the things that are most important to them, they may want to work on a couple of asset areas, and through those, they begin to develop some livelihood strategies. A lot of service providers have sort of set programs, but the most important thing really is to listen to what people want to have happen in their lives so that they can build their livelihood strategies. And you can see when someone comes to a program and then when they leave, there's change in the various asset areas. So if you look above the service provider, there's the idea of strategic interventions. In the work that we've been doing, we've clearly documented that the most significant outcomes are limited by the policy and institutional context. It's very hard for people to move forward because of the policies that are in place and the contextual issues that make it very difficult for people to move forward. We're in a situation where we have a housing crisis that, by definition, increases vulnerability. There are also ways that various government bodies organize policies policies are not designed holistically. They're designed for very specific interventions. There might be a housing person, a housing organization. There might be a health providing organization. There's educational institutions. So there's this whole new field of system navigation supports that are being provided to individuals so that they can make their way through all of the various structures to put together the kinds of livelihood strategies for themselves. So as far as the framework goes, it's not a very complex framework, but then when you start looking at the various pieces of it, it provides a good language for understanding the idea of livelihood development and what is it that people need to put in place in order to live well.
Thank you so much for this presentation. We've learned so much. I have no questions, but I'd like to pass on to Nashwa to see if you do.
I just wanted to say thank you again, both of you, for everything. And you did address so many things that we went into this with and gave us a framework and an understanding of sustainable livelihoods and the difference from other frameworks and nonprofit models that was very important for our audience, especially with the questions that we're going to explore during the podcast. I did want to know what can people do who want to engage in this framework, or where could they find more of your resources? We're going to link some in the show notes, but where could they find more of your work, or if they're in Ontario or across Canada, how can they engage more with this work?
For sure. Actually, I would say that they can go to our website. So we have our website that has a whole lot of resources that people can access easily. But also, please feel free to reach out to Mary and myself. Our email addresses are here. And we're happy to either have a discussion on working with an individual organization that seeks to embed this kind of framework in their work. And it can be in any number of places. We could do it at a program level, in evaluation, in any kind of new research you would like to generate. And then what we would do also is maybe make a recommendation that you participate in one of our trainings. We do trainings twice a year in spring and fall. So we just completed our spring training very recently, and we are going to have a fall training starting in October, where we will train organizations on both the Sustainable Lives Framework as well as motivational interviewing. So more details to come on our website soon, but please look out for that.
I think that the audience for this is probably quite broad. And so for an individual who's looking to use these tools, the tools are on the website. The My Plan and the asset mapping documents can be just printed off. And if an individual takes themselves through that, they begin to look at their own, the areas where they have strength and the areas that they might want to be working on. The majority of our work is with nonprofit organizations or networks of nonprofit organizations. And we do work with organizations that work with specific populations, for like the disabled population or people who are just who are leaving incarceration. And so most of what we do is with organizations, but those organizations work with people who are trying to implement some kind of changes so that they can have more of the kind of life that they want to have than they currently have.
Thank you both so much. And I guess my last piece is, if the audience can leave with just like one takeaway about what sustainable livelihoods means, what would each of you say is like the one takeaway they should leave with?
I think the one takeaway is that it doesn't really, everybody has assets. Everybody has something that gives them strength, and understanding that asset, and then looking at areas that they might want to be doing a little bit more work on. I think that sometimes it just gets very complicated. There's like life is just a miasma of things that are difficult. But that it doesn't really matter who you are. You have something very positive that you can use, and probably multiple things that are very positive, that are assets in your life that you can build on.
Yeah, I would ditto that, what Mary said. I have personally, both as a practitioner in the community as well as an individual who has used this framework, always felt that basic reframe that I am, even despite the most difficult circumstance, I do have an asset that I can lean on and build on, reduces the feeling of overwhelm and isolation, and understanding that there are people who will walk with you instead of judging you for what you don't have, is a very big shift. And I think that really makes a big mark when it comes to sustainable livelihoods.
Alrighty. Thank you so much, Mary. Thank you so much, Vibhuti. We really appreciate everything that you shared today. Our viewers, I think, are going to have a lot of takeaways, a lot of things to look at in the future, and potentially join with the different programs that you have in the future. Thank you so much today, and we look forward to seeing all the awesome work that you have to do in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Reimagining Disabled Futures, a new podcast from the Disabled Women's Network of Canada. We hope you enjoyed our conversation. This episode was produced by Andre Goulet and the Harbinger Media Network. Find out more about Canada's #1 progressive podcast community at harbingermedianetwork.com. Support for this show comes from Women and Gender Equity Canada. Find out more about the work we do at Dawn at dawncanada.net and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Please stay tuned for a new episode of the Reimagining Disabled Futures podcast next month. Until then, I'm Neshwalina Khan, Senior Research Associate at Dawn Canada, and thanks for listening.